Well, hello and welcome. Thanks for joining this week's panel conversation. We have two leaders in law enforcement that are joining us today to talk about how they're engaging with their residents and helping their community deal with just stakeholder involvement in the work that they do in the public safety world. My name is Matt Fulton. I'm the Vice President for National Engagement with a company called Pulco. Pulco and its research arm, National Research Center, work with communities around building engagement and helping with assessing performance from a resident. Well, hello and welcome. Thanks for joining this week's panel conversation. We have two leaders in law enforcement that are joining us today to talk about how they're engaging with their residents and helping their community deal with just stakeholder involvement in the work that they do in the public safety world. My name is Matt Fulton. I'm the Vice President for National Engagement with a company called Pulco. Pulco and its research arm, National Research Center, work with communities around building engagement and helping with assessing performance from a resident's perspective, so that as communities build and go forward, you can use the values of those residents on making managerial decisions on moving the community forward. Today, we're going to be talking about putting police needs and expectations into a community context. And we're going to be talking about the challenges that law enforcement departments are facing and how they're dealing with it and how they're capturing residents' perspectives and managing those expectations and priorities as they go about their work in law enforcement. The hope is that you'll pick up an idea, you'll get a new perspective that you'll be able to benefit from. I love these sessions because you have the opportunity to hear from leaders in law enforcement about things that are impacting communities across the country. And so thanks for joining us. Here's kind of the layout for the day. We'll do a quick introduction of the panelists, and then we'll kick into the panel conversation after I introduce the topic a little bit. The session generally lasts about an hour, and so I'm excited to get into the conversation. Once the questions are finished, I'll give an opportunity for the panelists to ask each other any questions or to add any comments or additional thoughts that they have at that time. But I just really appreciate you joining us for this presentation. So let me start doing some introductions. Our first panelist is Chief Rick Butsko, who began his law enforcement career with the City of Grove City Division of Police in Ohio in September of 1992 after graduating from Ohio State Highway Patrol Academy. Chief Butsko worked in a variety of really responsible roles in the department until his appointment as Chief of Police in 2018. He has degrees in public safety management and leadership and a master's degree in public administration. He's also a graduate of the FBI National Academy. Rick, I was just down at the conference last week and gained a lot of respect for FBI Academy graduates and the alumni that you form through that educational process. Rick is also a military veteran, serving 4 years of active duty with the Marines, including a tour during Operation Desert Storm. Rick, thank you for joining us, and I would love for you to add just a little bit of color to your background, if you don't mind.
Yes, Matt, thank you for having me on. I am a lifelong Central Ohio resident, so not only am I professionally interested in what's happening in Central Ohio and in Grove City, but it means a lot to me personally as well. My wife and I have 5 children. We live here in the Grove City area. And a little bit about Grove City. We are a suburb of Columbus, the metropolitan area of Franklin County, which is where Columbus is seated, is about 1 million people. Grove City is a population of 42,000. So we serve the population in Grove City with 64 police officers and about 95 total staff, including the officers. So looking forward to the conversation. Thanks for having me on, Matt.
Yeah. Thanks so much for being here. I'm happy to introduce our second panelist, Jasmine Sen. She's been with Arlington County Police Department for 15 years. Jasmine currently oversees the community outreach department and is a supervisor, and she oversees the outreach efforts in the southern portion of Arlington County, Virginia. She has served in a variety of critical roles in the department, including working in patrol and investigations, including work around financial crimes and homicide robbery units. Additionally, she has held a special deputization with the United States Secret Service, which I'd love to learn more about. But that allowed her to successfully open and assist in the prosecution of several federal cases in the Eastern District Circuit. Intermittently throughout her career, she has held position as a hostage crisis negotiator and intelligence analysis for the emergency response team. Jasmine, that is a very, very impressive resume, and I would really welcome you to share a little bit more about your background.
Thank you for having me. I am, like you said, this is my 15th year this month. I'm a mom of two. My husband is also in law enforcement. He works for the federal government for the Secret Service. So we are definitely a law enforcement family. My brother is also a cop. Makes things interesting at holidays. As you mentioned, my current position is actually newer for me. This is the first time I've had the opportunity to engage with our community policing section. I'd always known that they were in the background doing things that, most patrolmen don't really concern themselves with. But I definitely appreciate the challenge that's been set before me. And it's just an extremely dynamic time to get the opportunity to move forward with how police work is going to fit into the context of our community from this day forward. But ironically, I did get promoted to the rank of sergeant the week of George Floyd. So it's been a little bit of baptism by fire, but that's how things roll for me. So I'm happy for the challenge, and I'm really looking forward to some of the ideas that we discussed today.
That's great. Well, congratulations not only on your promotion, but on the work that you do in your career to date. Just to really appreciate both of you spending some time with us to share your perspectives on these topics. So the topic today is putting police needs and expectations into a community context. I was a city manager for many, many years, and public safety was such a critical and important responsibility that the community had, and it honestly impacts every aspect of community life. People invest in communities for a variety of reasons. Not all monetary, not all financial. It really is the quality of life that they're able to get, and public safety and their ability to feel safe in their communities is at the top of that list. So I totally respect the work that law enforcement personnel do and the leadership that you provide to your departments and the work that you do in connecting with the stakeholders. It's just such a critical part of a community's fabric. And then you add on the complexities and the challenges that we currently face ourselves, whether it's the pandemic or it's the civil unrest or it's just the political divisiveness that has certainly impacted law enforcement departments and the way you deliver services. You are always needing to adapt to a changing environment. You've always got overlapping issues that are impacting the department, and you play just such a critical role, and the repercussions of making a mistake are just so high. And when you make a mistake in local government, especially in the law enforcement area, the impact really ends up to be generational. And so I'm really glad to be getting into this conversation with both of you today. We have a survey tool that we call it the National Police Services Survey, and the intent behind the survey is really to identify community perspectives around law enforcement across the entire community. And we did a national administration of the survey in 2018, and then as well as 2020. And the chart that you see in front of you is the shift in resident priorities between the 2 years. And while some of the stuff probably doesn't surprise you, I do want to highlight some of the changes in the priorities that residents have relating to law enforcement. School safety and security is at the top of the list in both administrations. The area that actually increased in resident perspectives and resident needs and priorities is actually in the area of that community partnership between residents and police departments for neighborhood problem solving and just working closer together on the issues that are impacting communities and neighborhoods. And given what has happened over the last couple of years, it probably makes some sense that people are connecting with their local government. I mean, so many times people take for granted all of the services that they receive from local government until there's a really big issue that's impacting the community. And then unless you have those connections, it's really difficult sometimes to make the connections between the operations of the city and the law enforcement functions and responsibilities. So these shifts in priorities give us kind of a window of opportunity to talk about engagement and think about how we can better engage with our residents on things that are impacting in the community. And so I'm really excited to be hearing about what you're doing that is working successfully, particularly as you think about those harder to reach populations or those more difficult populations in the community. Appreciate you thinking about that a little bit in your responses. So here are the three questions that we're going to be posing. What role should the community play in guiding or influencing the delivery of local police services? What strategies do you use for managing community expectations? And then finally, what tools and methods do you use to understand resident expectations and priorities regarding local police services? So let's kick off into the conversation. And Chief Butsko, I'd like to start with you. Chief Butsko, can you talk about the role that the community should play in guiding or influencing the delivery of police services in Grove City?
Yeah, thank you, Matt, for the opportunity to talk about this. And I want to begin my comments with putting them into the context, not really for my law enforcement audience, but more for the citizens and concerned people that really haven't given much academic thought to what policing is all about, the history of it. And I want to start with saying that I think on a national discussion, we are beginning this discussion with an identity crisis. So what do I mean by that? The identity crisis is we have forgotten the traditions and the foundation that has made this country terrific and has made the Western lifestyle the best that we have ever seen in the course of human history. And the tradition specifically that I am speaking of is that of the Constitution, going all the way back to hundreds of years in the beginning of the idea of individual rights that cannot be alienated by government or others with the Magna Carta. So the identity crisis that we are suffering from is going to be very relevant to my answering of the question of what role does the community play. So once again, for my citizen audience that may be listening to this message, the Constitution guarantees certain things. It guarantees these whether they're popular. It guarantees whether the majority of the people like them or wish to change them. We have a foundation where individual rights guaranteed by the Constitution trump any other initiatives. We have the right to free speech. We have the right to keep and bear arms. We have the protection from unreasonable searches and seizures. We have the right against self-incrimination. And importantly, all citizens have a right to due process, and the Constitution promises that all persons shall enjoy equal protection of the laws. And I wanted to lay that foundation because there are a lot of ideas around the concept of reimagining policing. The problem with so many of these ideas is that to implement some of these initiatives, we have to trample all over the Constitution to get there. We have to say that the majority voice rules and that these individual rights that have really secured America as such a great country needs to now be ignored. So I wanted to share that point so that our friends that are listening to this that haven't had the training or the considerations on why policing is structured the way that it is will understand that this is way beyond police attitudes, police strategies, or police theories. That really the ultimate goal of policing is to serve and defend the Constitution. And the Constitution secures those individual rights. And that has got to be stressed, because if we don't agree on that, really we're going to have to reimagine more than just policing. We're going to have to reimagine Western living as a whole. So I wanted to put that in context. Now, within the restrictions of individual rights, I want to answer the question of what role should the community play? And I believe that this is also not a new discussion, that this is as old as modern policing, with the 9 principles of modern policing by Sir Robert Peel. And I jotted this note down so I could quote one that's very relevant today that answers the community role in policing. And that is, of the 9 Peelian principles, this rings true today as much as it was written over almost 150 years ago. The police are the public, and that the public are the police. The police being the only members of the public who are paid to give full-time attention to the duties which are incumbent on every citizen in the interest of community welfare and existence. And what Sir Robert Anderson recognized in 1829 is that the best type of policing and the best types of community exist when there is a partnership within a trusted framework of the Constitution that the police and the citizens abide by. And then the police are sensitive to the specific needs of that community and tailor the services based upon the individual needs, but that still fit into the rights afforded of equal protection under the law for all persons. And let me give you an example of what that can look like. In Grove City, many of our citizens have family members and loved ones that are suffering from addiction and the devastating effects of opiates and heroin. That is a common scenario. So what we have done to address that specific problem is partnered our special operations group, which are plainclothes detectives that focus on street level type crimes, have focused with our loss prevention managers in retail locations and with mental health addiction counselors. And about once or twice a year, sometimes 3 years, we will have what we call a retail theft blitz, where a partnership between the police, loss prevention, and mental health counselors, we come together, and for an 8-hour day, the plainclothes officers in loss prevention are catching shoplifters. And the nexus between shoplifting and addiction is that many of the drug users will shoplift to daily afford their habit. And in our most recent initiative, we intercepted 13 shoplifters, and of those 13, 8 admitted to us that they were shoplifting to support their addiction. So we, with that, with this initiative, we take care of the criminal proceedings, issue them a summons for theft or whatever orders of business that we have, and then immediately turn them over to the mental health and addiction counselors. So that is a response where we are tailoring our services specifically to the needs of the community, but staying within the purpose of the police and certainly within the Constitution. And to continue on with this, the citizens, just to finish my point, need to understand the common ground that we all are living in the community under, and then the police and the police leadership, the political leadership, should be very sensitive as to how to tailor their services to fit the specific needs that the community may be having.
Thank you, Chief. That was very well stated and very succinctly stated, and a message that we haven't had that direct and clear message delivered in any of these panels. So I really appreciate you kind of laying that backdrop to how your role fits into the community and residents' roles in return. So thank you very much for that. Really appreciate it. Jasmine, can you talk about the role that the community should play in guiding or influencing the delivery of police services in Arlington County?
I think that they are actually the biggest missing component in what we're going through right now. And I don't think it's intentional. I think it's just something where police have always been a constant. The chief stated Peelian principles are what we learn coming through the academy. In those principles, it's reiterated numerous times that this is a partnership. This isn't something where one area is responsible as another waits to engage. I mean, it is it is as cohesive as it should be, if it's going in the right direction. I mean, we're community servants. I know a lot of people, they kind of scoff when they hear that term, but personally, I've worked numerous customer service jobs throughout my life prior to law enforcement, and I've always approached this job as the highest form of customer service. And in any form of customer service, as we know, when we get good service, we want to go back to that exact person who delivered that exact perfect service the first time. And we always know sometimes it falls short. However, it's a little unrealistic in what we do because as we all know, no two instances are the same. One slight change in a dynamic changes the entire projection of the outcome. Most people only get the final result of one particular incident. They don't know the background. They don't know the portions of what led to that particular situation, what led to our engagement, what prior contacts we'd had. So there's a lot of missing pieces that the community, and again, not for sake of them not wanting to engage, it's just, I think we personally as a profession have gone on too long without holding our community accountable for their portion of community policing. I'm a huge advocate for empowering communities. I know specifically on our team, I'm a Hispanic female. The 15 years I've worked in Arlington, we're about 35% Hispanic. And we've never really engaged on a certain level, at least to my standard, with that pocket of population. And we have a lot going on in the country currently with immigration. We have a lot of people who require services that maybe we're not as effective as we can be. So I know we've personally looked at different ways that we can do outreach. One of the most recent is one of my team members. He's a native Spanish speaker. He does a lot of work through social media. He does a lot of work through the local consulate through Colombia. He does most of his social media postings in both English and Spanish so that we can start engaging the community, because it's not just the people who cast the vote. It's not just the people who have the deeper pockets. This community belongs to everybody, and everybody deserves a voice. So I think once we can figure out what that looks like moving forward, we're going to be more effective in our job. But until we get those marching orders, I don't know. I'm not as hopeful because we haven't learned anything from the last year and a half.
It's really interesting. And I'm glad you brought up the issue of the difficulties sometimes for our community residents to really appreciate the work, the behind the scenes work that you're doing. Our research shows that 50% of the population has not had interaction with anybody in law enforcement for the past year. And so that means that half of the population is really basing their perspectives off of what they hear, maybe what they read. And so you need to understand that and to be able to find ways to connect with those people through kind of honest methods, but also then to understand what the experience is for people that have actually had interactions. Because the other point that you bring up, which I think is really solid, is that you get a first impression. Right? If you're not dealt with fairly or respectfully in your first impression, you're going to carry that forward during the day. And so part of the challenge, as I see it, and give me your thoughts here, but we need to figure out ways to have that greater levels of connections, especially in those harder to reach populations, in order so that they can put into context the work that you do every day instead of just during the storms. Does that make sense to you?
Absolutely. I know, not to be silly, but a couple of years ago, I remember running across a website that was like Rate a Cop. And of course, our morbid curiosity, everybody wants to know if they're hitting the mark. But most of the time, people only put that feedback out there if it's negative. Very rarely do people take the time to acknowledge the good, solid work, which we all know happens every day. But unfortunately, it's just the world we live in. We want what we want it now. And we just have to figure out how law enforcement is going to try to hit that mark. But the reality is we won't always be able to hit that mark, because at the end of the day, we're human beings and we're not the only stakeholders that are involved in the issue.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. Our research has also shown that during the pandemic, and in large part based on the work that law enforcement agencies have done, trust in local government has actually increased. And I think it probably makes sense because in times of crisis, that's when the champions that work in local government all rise and help the community survive through issues like pandemics and social unrest and all those kinds of things. And so you're hitting on it very clearly and very directly. So thank you. Jasmine, I'd like to continue on the second question, starting with you, if you don't mind. Jasmine, can you talk about the strategies that the county is using for managing community expectations?
We actually take the approach. We have a new chief. He was just he's a homegrown chief, should I say. He came through the ranks of our agency. He stepped up during the civil unrest. Our former chief departed. He was acting, and he recently just took the permanent position with the department. We're all very pleased to have him because he knows the pulse of the department and the potential. So we have been very hands-on with not waiting for the community to come to us per se. I know that a lot of people in the nation right now, including ourselves, are going through a lot of oversight committee discussions and policing practices group discussions, which again, we've been through, but our chief is taking a very direct approach and putting himself right in the middle of the community. So as a community supervisor, my team and I have been coordinating a number of social engagement events where we use small businesses within the county, and we invite people to come talk to the chief and just ask him any question about any topic, no matter how big or small, just so we can start building those very much needed interpersonal relationships with somebody who I feel the community has a certain expectation of. Of course, they have an expectation of local law enforcement. We're the ones who show up at their door when they call 911. It's not going to be our chief of police, but he's the person who gets to delegate what our daily responsibilities are and what his expectation of his officers are. So he creates the outline. So I'm really excited because we've only hosted two. Our next event is coming up this week. And again, not to beat a dead horse, but we are doing a Hispanic outreach. We're going to have my chief doesn't speak Spanish, but we will have a translator assigned to him. So any community members that want to come and speak with him, because again, a lot of the people, as we just mentioned, who don't necessarily have a voice or a comfort level, or they come from maybe places where they don't have the types of relationships that we are accustomed to with law enforcement here in the US, that they understand that this is a safe place and we are genuinely here to help. So I know he's very excited because this is a first for him. And this is actually a first for the department regarding this type of engagement. But I see that there's a lot of interest on social media. So I'm hoping that this just opens up more opportunities for us to figure out how we can be more effective.
Yeah, congratulations. That's great. I'm really happy to hear that. And I wish you well. People are connected at their neighborhood levels. And so getting people to those events, especially your Hispanic population and others, that's very, very cool. And congratulations. That's going to be, it's in part probably due to the work that you're doing and your outreach responsibilities, but reaching out into the community, that's just excellent, excellent way to start building those bridges and those direct connections. So thank you. Chief Butsko, can you talk about the strategies that you're using for managing community expectations in Grove City?
Yeah, thanks for the question, Matt. I'll tell you, it begins with the leadership team and me being very clear to the team how we run our operation internally. So we subscribe to management by objectives, intelligence-led policing, and community policing type strategies internally. And what that focuses us on is being very intentional. So the risk in law enforcement is if the leadership is not very intentional about what we're going to do and why we are doing it, the police department will become self-serving. And I've seen examples of that, where the police and the police officers will begin doing the things that they think is correct, rather than this being by intention and by design. So the first pillar of the 2015 Presidential Task Force on 21st Century Policing gives us some excellent clarity on this issue. And honestly, there's not reason to not follow the advice given in this well-done report specifically. And that is, the first pillar begins with building trust and legitimacy with the community and focusing on procedural justice. What outrages people and what we have seen when they think whatever has happened is not just. So the just, or the The concerns with procedural justice begins with lack of relationship, lack of trust, lack of transparency, and lack of accountability. And I've chosen those words carefully there because all of those need to be addressed. Leadership is about initiative and taking the initiative to address those points. We have a strong emphasis on customer service. So very hastily, we are repeating this mantra that I'm sharing with you. Internally, we are advancing our professionalism. Externally, we are advancing customer service, continually addressing that point to our citizens. We invite public participation in the division activities greatly. We have a very robust Citizens Police Academy. We do the Coffee with a Cop program, and we have a full-time community outreach division, our Community Services Bureau, that focuses on these events. We continue with the DARE program, the School Resource Officer program. We have presentations that we do that are pretty popular and pretty well received. All of those are to be expected and are pretty traditional. Nothing new there. But I will share one thing that is new and one thing that I think is going to make a difference. And we just started it here in the last couple of weeks. And I suspected that it was going to be successful. And I'm surprised at how successful this has been. The title of this is Community Connection Program. The problem that we had and the problem that I was trying to fix was that our programs from National Night Out, to Coffee with a Cop, the Citizens Police Academy, require the citizens to come to us. The President's 21st Century Report on Policing said that we need to, the leadership, police leadership, needs to find opportunities to initiate positive non-enforcement activities. But if you leave it to the citizens to drive to you, they're going to be limited in their commitments and willingness to do that. So we have a division golf cart that we use for special events. And I thought over a period of time, what would it be like if the police leadership got in a golf cart on a Saturday when everyone's out and gardening and doing this? And we drive in our communities, and yet every time we see a citizen out, we stop the cart. We walk up to the citizen and just wave and say hello and say, we're driving through. We wanted to check in and tell you that we care about our police service. How are we doing? So I had this idea, and we launched this. We've done it 3 times now. And I've been out once. I put one of my lieutenants who that rank in our division works at the deputy chief billet. And the results from the citizens have been amazing. They love it. They want more of it. We came upon some people that are regular customers of the police enforcement side of our business. And even during that interaction, they chuckled at how many times they've been arrested by the police. They kind of slapped us on the back and said, you guys are just doing your job. You're terrific. You've always treated us with respect. It's my fault. So even in these communities, when you think that the people don't want to speak to people, or I'm sorry, to police officers during positive non-enforcement interactions, you may want to take a second look at that theory because it has been terrifically popular. We're going to continue it, and understanding that those interactions, non-enforcement, positive, are exactly the type of relationship that we want, so that when we are in that crisis, when we are in that significant event, the officer involved shooting or other questionable activity, we have enough relationships, trust and legitimacy has been established at least as much as you possibly can. And we are leaning more towards trying to establish our commitment to the procedural justice that is so important for legitimacy in policing our communities.
You know, Chief, congratulations on that. I think that's a really creative and innovative way to demonstrate leadership in the community. And it ties into what Jasmine said in a couple of different ways. The intentionality of what you're doing, we've had a lot of leaders that have been on this panel talking about the trust aspect. And, you need to have that trust. Government runs by trust. If you don't have the trust, you're not going to be able to accomplish anything. But by building those first impressions that Jasmine talked about and that you're bringing up and you're doing off of the golf cart on a Saturday morning, I mean, what better way to meet people and to greet people and to kind of humanize the work that you're doing. And I just think that's a great thing that you're doing. Congratulations on that. That is very cool.
Thank you.
Wish you the best of success with that for sure. Chief, just a question. Did you notice over the last year, did your resident engagement increase in any way?
Yes, I'll tell you that during the summer of 2020, I was still a young chief, just about 2 years as chief of police, and navigating the challenges was eased a bit because of the outpouring of support that we had from our citizens. And I really credit the work of the chiefs before me in Grove City and the terrific work of the officers by sticking. We have one of our core values is respect, and we respect all persons, and treating those who are having a terrible day and even acting disrespectful to us should not compromise who we are. Everyone deserves respect, even if they're not offering it. And because of the work of the officers doing that, our citizens think we're terrific. And the outpouring of gifts such as pizza and snacks and letters of well-wishing, social media posts of how much they appreciate their local police. It really was significant. That was a difficult time, even though we weren't having the specific problems that maybe you guys were having in Minneapolis and many others. Every officer in the country felt the effects and the criticisms. So when the people that you are trying to help, the people that you're trying to serve, share a message of support, it goes a long way. So that was our experience in Grove City, and it was very meaningful.
That's great. Really glad to hear that. Chief, let me stick with you, but let's switch over to the third question. Chief Butsko, can you talk about the strategies and tools and methodologies that you're using to first understand resident expectations and priorities, but then also tools that you're using for tracking your overall departmental performance?
For sure. Very important that you stay focused on the service to the citizens. I did mention that earlier, and I want to stress it again because it's relevant to this question. If we are not very intentional about providing services to the citizens, we risk becoming self-serving. And I've seen that in other organizations. I've seen it in pockets in my own department, that absence of intentional efforts daily, aligning ourselves with a customer service mindset, with working towards the objectives that are set, maybe short-term or even long-term annually. Absence of those, we will miss the mark. So really, to gauge the customer, the citizen expectations and priorities, we use formal and informal methods. Our formal method is through a consulting service that we hire to poll our citizens on the delivery of police services. So we just had one done. We do this every 2 years, and we've been doing it for quite a while. So with this recent poll that has a series of questions that are pretty predictable, our consultants connected with 504 residents. And out of these 504, we had the highest courtesy and respect ratings. And that is very, very important to me. It is feedback to us that we are on the right track in our personalized and human approach to dealing with the people that are receiving our services. So that is the most formal approach that we have to measuring the expectations and priorities. Informally, we are very responsive. We make it easy for the citizens to connect with us through our website. So if you were to go to our website, whether it be to the city or specifically to the Division of Police, it's very easy to leave a comment. Sometimes they'll want to leave a comment specifically for the chief, and they can click on my name and send me an email, or they'll just leave it on the general division feedback page. I am very careful and intentional to make sure that every comment receives a reply. And I've assigned an officer specifically to do nothing but deal with those quality of life issues. And that's usually what we are getting. We get some compliments from officers. We appreciate those for sure and welcome those. But people will call in with the neighborhood quality of life issues that sometimes don't register as meaningful in a police officer's day of duties. For example, there's no young police officer there that goes through the rigors of the hiring process, goes to the academy, learns all these terrific things, and is looking forward to his first parking complaint or barking dog complaint. But nevertheless, those are some of the things that we need to take care of. And we need to be very intentional to not let those little things slip through the cracks, because to the neighbor that's right in the middle of living with that, it's meaningful. So we are very careful to make sure that we have an officer that is dedicated to address those issues and to listen to the complaints that are coming through. I also started another program because we are getting more and more elder community members. So to address the expectations and the priorities, I have hired an elder services coordinator. So the elder services coordinator is a civilian position that is an advocate and ombudsman for our senior population. So the purpose of this individual and their assignment is to help elders navigate anything that has to do with policing or criminal justice. We have assisted living facilities that have grown up quite a bit here in Grove City. We're a growing population. The growth in our community is tremendous, and there seems to be a lot of emphasis towards the seniors. So we wanted to make sure that we were paying attention to their expectations through the assignment of that position. We also follow up with every crime victim of a felony level crime. We make sure that they get a personal phone call and touch from our investigators. So every single one, so that we can talk to them personally beyond just the initial reporting, and to get an idea of what they're, how we can help them through those processes. Sometimes there's not much that you can do in a lot of these situations, but when people know that they were not just another statistic of a report, but that we care about what happened to them, we are able to listen to them and manage those expectations. And it really goes a long way towards our emphasis on customer service, caring about each and every person, and everyone is important. And those are some of the things that we do to make sure that we stay on track of that.
That is wonderful. Thank you for that. I have a couple of different follow-up questions. First of all, congratulations on your senior ombudsman position. You know, as communities start to age, making sure that your communities understanding where your community is with regard to your elderly population is such a critical thing. And so having somebody focus on that, I think there's going to be a lot of people that are going to be interested in learning more about that program. So congratulations on that. I wish you well.
Thank you.
I'm kind of curious if you have any recommendations on how frequently a department should do your formal survey work in order for it to be meaningful and helpful in building that trend line. Do you have any thoughts there?
We've determined that a 2-year cycle is the appropriate window. If you do it too often, those phone calls can become a bit of a nuisance. And what our consultant reported this time is it was a little bit more challenging to get people to cooperate on the telephone survey. So essentially what our consultant does is telephones into people in the evening. And if your experience is like mine, when a person calls and it's a telemarketer, you don't even hardly spend time to hear what they're selling before you hang up or just ignore the call altogether. So I would risk doing it too often for that reason. And what we have found is that the data points, so we've been doing this since at least 2013, maybe a little bit earlier, but I can say that I looked at the data points through then, and it gives enough time between the two different surveys for you to be able to make some assessments as to whether your efforts are working, or are the initiatives or the adjustments that we have made in delivering our services, is it hitting our mark? Do we need to put more emphasis on different areas? This report, there was a very strong request. Now, this is unique, and my law enforcement friends pay attention to this point I'm about to make, that it was overwhelmingly our citizens want more police officers. And secondly, they want more police officers in the neighborhoods. So what our consultant does is say, is there one thing you would like to tell the police, kind of a question? And then they actually jot down the notes. So I've got pages of just comments from the citizens and from these 500 plus phone calls that we took. They want more police, and they want the police to be in their neighborhoods. That is part of the importance for police leadership to be careful to just employ intelligence-led policing practices, that you really also are managing and paying attention to the community policing efforts, and that any political leaders be very, very cautious of trimming away opportunities for police to be present in the neighborhoods during the positive non-enforcement type interactions, because that is what the communities want.
And that's directly in line with what I suggested earlier, that as you start to think about where resident priorities have shifted, it is really in creating closer relationships with officers in the neighborhood level, so you can do more neighborhood problem solving. So that makes a lot of sense, and lines up really well. Thanks so much. Really appreciate that input.
Thank you.
Jasmine, can you talk about the tools and methods that you're using at the county for helping to understand resident expectations and priorities, and tracking your performance?
So we are with the change of our chief and all of the internal conversations that have taken place with county stakeholders and the community thus far, we've landed on creating our community policing team into an actual division. Just prior to that, over the last couple of years, we've actually faceted out to different versions of outreach. So I am a sergeant for the community outreach team, specifically responsible for the southern portion of the county, because the populations tend to vary slightly from north to south. However, the reason I bring that up is we have a large population of retail businesses in our community as well. They actually contribute 51% of the revenue to the county. So in terms of needs and responsibilities, we kind of have to balance both the residential need and the business need, because there's such a large pocket of our community. With that, we had a gentleman who worked for us. He's since retired, but he did a fantastic job of starting it's specifically the Arlington Restaurant Initiative. And with that, what they do is they have a civilian and a sworn officer who goes out and engages into the community to the restaurants. Obviously, Chief, I'm sure you're familiar with restaurants, alcohol, younger populations. There's certain pockets of things that require a certain level of attention, but only during certain times of the day, during the week. And we realized as patrol officers, we're very limited in what we can do to be proactive about a lot of these measures. And the gentleman who started this program was actually a midnight officer who had worked that particular section of the county and came up with this awesome plan to branch this out so that it wasn't something that was falling on patrol, and it gave those business owners the necessary attention that they deserved, because they had just as much vested as the next person. And then with that formed the business outreach unit. So instead of just concentrating on restaurants and permitting and alcohol laws and partnering with some of our other local agencies, such as the Alcohol Beverage Commission, the business outreach section of it helped with things such as safety measures, security systems, lighting, points of entry, and they became a resource for the local businesses within the county. We have a gentleman who was on my team. We're losing him. He got a great position working for the county, but he was a police officer who homelessness was a huge part of his passion project. And he went on to form what we refer to as the HOP, which is the Homeless Outreach Project. And he partnered with mental health services, the county, some of the other entities that we have for the homeless population, but he couldn't help but see the overlap in our involvement with homeless as it pertains to reoccurring crime. Chief, you mentioned the story about theft. A lot of these people steal to sell, to eat, or heaven forbid, they're nursing some type of addiction on top of everything else. So he did a phenomenal job of starting that program as well. And that's something that we're going to continue with. We have the LGBTQIA plus. We have officers that are dedicated for that specific population. Not just those officers, but just to help officers understand the special needs that are created within the communities when certain crimes are reported, that extra follow-up, just so we know, addressing certain levels of comfort that are needed. So we've been very robust in our outreach, but specifically to what I engage with on a daily basis is the community as a whole, quality of life. We have a tremendous police information officer who partners extremely well with us. She's our right-hand person. Anytime we have blue sky thoughts, she's the first person we run it past because she knows what it looks like as far as social media engagement, verbiage that we need so people understand what the intention is, what the expected outcome is. We do Nextdoor, the Nextdoor app. I'm sure you guys are familiar. I'm way past the social media stuff, but my team loves it. I have a bunch of young, anxious officers who are very much involved with social media. Anytime we see any type of crime trends, anytime any major event happens, we mentioned the conversations with the chief, we put those out on Nextdoor. Any way we can engage with our community as far as that app goes, that's our first go-to, because that to us, that's as if I'm picking up a phone to text somebody. They're just as in the know within 2 seconds as, if we were to put something on a website where somebody has to go looking for that information. So we've realized with this particular generation, they want the information delivered to them immediate. They don't want to have to go look for it, which is fine, because as far as time and organization, far better than most of us. So we're trying to exploit that to our best of our ability. We are also hoping to, very similar to your golf cart, Chief, is we proposed buying a trailer, an actual trailerable trailer with a truck and trailer. And anytime we identify that there is any type of crime trend, whether it's burglaries, larcenies from auto, destruction of property, graffiti, we can actually bring the trailer out and just sit on the corner, any intersection in the county. And we have a couple uniformed officers there. We can hand out literature if people want us to look at their properties, give them some suggestions from what we see, and then obviously refer them to other more resourceful people who can help them do safety surveys of their properties, answer any questions about past crimes that have occurred, and obviously share any information we can, as long as it's not an ongoing criminal investigation. So we're really excited about it because the potential for that is huge. We could do major events. As you know, being in Arlington County, we're an immediate offshoot of DC. We have the Marine Corps Marathon, we have the Army 10 miler, we have a huge footprint with the 4th of July celebration because you can see the fireworks from across the river. So we always have something going on throughout the calendar year, and that allows for our officers to be readily available. Not just for presence, but for just general conversation and any community concern. Or, as you mentioned, Chief, a lot of the community as of late has been extremely appreciative of the efforts that they've seen us put forward this last year, and in the past as well. But just very, very appreciative. And I mean, just the outpouring of support has really been what's, I think, gotten most of the officers through this last year, because it's been so challenging just to know that, we're not always going to be the popular person, but we don't do it for ourselves. We do it for the community. And that means that what we're doing is being relayed in the way that we want it to be. We're kind of the last ones to know that. So it's definitely nice when a community member steps up and gives us our recognition, I guess is the best way to put it. But the last thing I personally utilize quite often, personally and for my team, is I'm a huge proponent of training. Any opportunity I get to do anything, and it doesn't have to be necessarily specific to community policing, because we all know a lot of this stuff overlaps. But if I can be a better effective leader, that doesn't only apply to the people whom I work with, that is also in my community. So just recently I attended a training that reminded me that, as we mentioned, the Pelian principles before, it's kind of what I look at every day to remind myself what I need to do, is we lost a lot of our community engagement when we put people in a car and had them drive around. We don't have people on foot. We don't have those daily conversations. We don't know the people in our areas anymore. And it's not, obviously, it was well intended. It allows us to answer more calls for service. But I think we've lost the interpersonal relationships that we had when, that beat cop used to stand on the corner and anybody can come up and, talk to them or even just bring them something to drink, or it's been lost for a while, but I'm definitely positive that we can get that back.
Thank you, Jasmine. I have to say, just hearing all of your outreach stuff that you're doing, my sense is that you're really in an exciting point in your department's history because of the kind of the refocusing in on the engagement and the importance of the engagement. And, organizing a division that is focused on outreach is a very strong organizational statement about that commitment to that work. So congratulations. I think it'd be a fun environment to be around, and I just wish you well.
I'm very excited about it. And I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but with staffing levels, sometimes it's a challenge to find those bodies to be able to commit to something like that. But my chief is extremely committed to the promise that he's made to the community to make this his central focus. And obviously there's going to have to be some sacrifices, but the engagement portion of it is something he wasn't willing to sacrifice. So
yeah, I think you and Chief Butsko would agree that, especially as you start to think about employee morale and employee satisfaction, having those intentional and direct connections with the residents that you serve in a positive kind of environment certainly helps for you to meet the challenges of the day. I am kind of curious, within your strategic planning and your directions, have you set up any kind of a metric system for tracking how well you're doing?
That is actually something that was drawn to our attention during our police practices review. We hired an outside consulting company to do an internal review, and then we had some community advocates and stakeholders do their own review. And that is something that's been identified. I don't think that as of now we have anything formally in place, but I think the harder part is figuring out, and maybe the chief can give me some direction offline, is how do you capture everything? How does that fall into an outline that makes sense to everybody, not just to us? And I personally think that we've fallen by the wayside in this particular topic because cops are not very good at advocating for themselves, and we're not very good at recognizing what is impactful for the long term. And it's just because most of us come into this job with hearts of service and we don't expect recognition or accolades for what we do. So it doesn't make any sense for us to sit there and write down, oh, well, I did this and I did this. So I think that's going to be the hardest thing, is to figure out what the community would like to see for us to capture and how we're going to be the most effective in doing that. Because if you leave it to us, I don't think without a little bit of input and guidance that we're going to be able to encompass everything that we touch on a daily basis.
Yeah, hold off on, I want you to respond to that, Chief, but hold off on that while I just thank you, Jasmine, for sharing that. I think that's a really important perspective to share. And communities are pretty complicated organizations, right? I mean, your work is impacting, I always used to say that every department is a public safety department, because if the streets aren't safe, your job is going to be more difficult. If building inspection don't do their job, public safety is going to get involved in one way or another. So it's such a multifaceted kind of thing. And let me just finish off this third panel by thanking you for your thoughts. I really appreciate that. And now I would love for the chief to kind of jump in and respond and share anything that you like. This is kind of the time where we can add a couple of minutes. We're kind of approaching the top of the hour, but love to hear any final thoughts or comments or additional perspectives. Go ahead.
Yeah, so my partner on the panel there just threw out one of the most challenging aspects of policing, especially when you get into the police leadership, the administration, or being the chief of police, is what are the measurements? Do we measure police activity? Is that evidence that we are doing something good? And the answer to that is no. Police activity is one thing that we observe, but that in itself is not evidence that we're doing good things or that we're in the right area. I mentioned earlier not to make this a police administration 101 type course, but it's important that when we look at the task, whatever we're trying to measure, that we're applying the right police management strategy. So management by objectives, intelligence-led policing, or community policing. So intelligence-led policing is pretty well understood. You're tracking data. You're using data to support whatever efforts to focus in an area, or using data points to measure results. So traffic crashes and traffic enforcement actually is a very easy application of intelligence-led policing. If you have a big enough data set on a group of crimes in a particular area, and then you commit resources, prevention, patrol, whatever, and then you're able to isolate as many variables as possible and link any successes to police activity, then that is an intelligence-led policing approach. The challenges with that are there are so many variables that are out of police control. And then you get into the community policing aspects, which really has a much softer and more elusive type of qualifiable data to try to track down, and that is people's attitudes and perceptions. So one message that I continually report to the officers is when we're giving them some assignment that they think is baloney. This is a waste of time. This is not going to make a difference. And I remind them that it does make a difference in the attitudes and approaches of our concern to the citizens' need. So I'm trying to give you an example of how these different management practices apply to all of the complexity of policing, and why sometimes it's not as simple as one input or one application of a strategy is going to fix or address a problem, because these things are much more complicated than that. But the attitudes are very important. Citizens' attitudes of how many traffic violations are happening in their neighborhood, how much crime is happening in the neighborhood, and then are the police concerned about helping them with that? That is part of the essence of community policing. It is not just developing data points that can be measured on a spreadsheet, but increasing customer satisfaction, citizen satisfaction, that the police care and the police are willing to do something. So I'll give another example of this. We have some computer equipment that can track traffic behavior in a certain area. And we do use these surveys and then publish these on our website to give citizens who are complaining about a particular problem in their neighborhood the truth about the speeding concerns that are happening. We know that when you get into these theories of traffic operation, that the 85th percentile of how vehicles are traveling tell us that if there were no speed measuring controls, that 85%, the majority of the people will be traveling at this speed. So when we get into the intelligence-led policing of traffic enforcement, we will lean on those. But people don't want to hear that type of stuff. Their kids are playing on their sidewalk, or they're out enjoying the outdoors, and there's cars that are speeding by. They're not interested in your equipment and your data. They want some enforcement. We need to address that, and we will. So depending on the specific problem that we're trying to fix, we'll direct the metric, or we will have to acknowledge that there is no metric, but we can reach out to people and let them know that we care, that we're willing to give some attention to their concerns, and at least help out with the perceptions, not necessarily changing the reality that there are some problems that will continue to exist regardless of our efforts. So there's kind of a whirlwind tour of police chiefing for beginners, I suppose.
Jasmine, anything back?
I 100% agree. As I mentioned earlier, people just want to know that they have a voice and they have the ability to exercise their right to that voice. We won't always be able to accommodate. We won't always be able to change that perception, but just allowing the opportunity for that voice, I think, is a very impacting. And I'm confident that if anything, this last year and a half, we've recognized that we're not in this alone. Our community is suffering along with us, and we just have to figure out how everybody can have their voice.
You know, I got to say, this has simply been an outstanding panel. I think that the conversation and the comments, your perspectives have been right on task and so critical. I love the way that both of you talked about the intentionality, and while the importance of data, those connections that you're making with people on a personal level, in all the things that you do and the creative ways that you're accomplishing it in this kind of wild environment. I'm really very, very impressed by the work that you're doing. Jasmine, I'm really excited for you and your department in the intentional work that you're doing around engagement. And Chief, I can tell by your leadership that the work that you're doing in your community is preserving individual rights, but also helping people feel good about the community they live in and the investments that they've made, kind of based around the work that you're doing. This has been great. I really love it. Congratulations on all of the work that you are doing. I am going to be following up this conversation with, I'll make sure you both have connections to each other, so you'll be able to kind of follow up with any questions of each other. You know, I do these conversations every Tuesday. So if there's other folks that you know of that you think would benefit by being part of it, or who see this and talk to you about it, send them my way. I'd love to get them scheduled so that we can add their perspectives to it. You'll start seeing these recordings probably in about a week on LinkedIn, and I'll make sure that you get connected with those linkages. And thanks for sharing them with your network. You know, the value of it is that there's a lot of people in your world that respect your opinions. And so the ability to share your thoughts with those people and your residents, for that matter, becomes all that much more important. My benefit is I get to meet cool people every week. And today was no exception. I just really appreciate the time that you spent. I loved the conversation that we had. There's going to be a lot of benefit to folks just listening in on the informative approach that you're taking and the intentional direction that you are embracing in engagement. As an engagement guy, I feel really positive about the work that you're doing. So,
Matt, do you say that to all your guests, or are we really special?
You are really special, Chief. Let me tell you that. You know what? I do thank all of my panels, but I'm being very sincere when I say that this was uniquely special, because I think that the stuff and the way that you presented, the points that you presented, I think really will create a resonating message to those folks who listen to it. So thanks
for the opportunity, Matt.
Yeah. Thanks so much. It was really nice meeting you, and I'll be reconnecting with you later.